Good grief. Believe it or not, Charlie Brown, not the cartoon but the namesake, once lived in St. Louis Park. It was on 36th Street between Highway 100 and Wooddale Avenue, where the houses were once demolished for offices, and now the offices are demolished for condos. It was a thriving neighborhood in the 1940s and 50s. Charlie, not Charles, Francis Brown was born February 23, 1926 in Minneapolis. In 1946, the family moved to a house at 5710 West 36th Street in the park. This house is no longer there. Then sometime between about 1950 and 1956, the family moved to 3971 Princeton, also in the park. Charlie Brown met Charles Schultz when they were both instructors at art instruction schools in Minneapolis. Schultz was a budding cartoonist and, for whatever the reason, asked Charlie Brown if he could use his name. Well, Brown said yes. Although his head was not round, he did not own a zigzag shirt and was not wont to say, "Good grief." The first cartoon featuring Charlie Brown went to press on October 2, 1950. Other Minneapolis folks who lent their names to the strip were Frieda Rich and Linus Maurer. Brown insists there was no Pigpen. As the years went by, Brown directed a young people's journal at Notre Dame. Charlie then returned to Minneapolis and spent 20 years as director of the Hennepin County Juvenile and Detention Center. Charlie Brown died on December 5, 1983 at age 57. Peppermint Patty remembers him as being the life of the party. Good grief. Each year, the St. Louis Park Historical Society holds their annual fundraiser at Jorvik Park. Proceeds go to the operation of the St. Louis Park Historical Society. The ice cream social is always very popular because of the ice cream and lemonade, of course, but there is so much to see and learn. Not unlike the olden days, it's enjoyable to just relax and schmooze with neighbors and friends and meet some new friends. For many who have never ridden on a train, spending some time in the depot brings a reality to how people used to travel every day before air travel became available and affordable. These days, most young and old have a cell phone, but to some of these youngsters, sending and receiving actual telegraph messages from one room of the depot to another, with the help of Historical Society staff like Bob Jorvik, it's totally new. Sparky the fire dog, he is always popular. Climbing up into a real fire truck is pretty cool for all ages as well. If you haven't been to the St. Louis Park Historical Society website yet, you must. It's like reading an encyclopedia of St. Louis Park. You can wander off in so many different directions, finding fascinating stories about people and places in the park you never knew about. Go to www.slphistory.org. The area to be designated Wolf Park included a lake called Johnson Lake, also known as the Swimming Hole, also called the Glen. It was located near Highway 100 and West 36th Street. It was not much of a lake. It was well hidden with overgrowth, and all manner of activities took place there. The local kids found it great for swimming, although the activity was not authorized by the city, and probably not even by their parents. Bathing suits were optional. The name of the lake was changed in 1963 to Wolf Lake, and plans were instituted to make it into a real swimming lake with sandy beaches and lifeguards. A unique part of the plan for Wolf Lake was that it was to be dredged to increase the size from 1 acre to 8 acres. The sand of the dredged area would then be sold, and the receipts would be used to improve the rest of the park system. In the summer of 1964, work was completed, and Wolf Lake was ready to be officially opened for swimming and summer activities. But before the beaches could be opened, a report from the Minnesota Department of Health showed unhealthy levels of bacteria in the lake. Although the lake was spring-fed, there was not enough water circulation to prevent buildup of bacteria. In spite of the report, the City Council decided to open the lake for the balance of 1964 on an experimental basis, while it studied a possible solution to the problem. One solution was to pump water into the lake from an unused well on the adjacent Friedheim gravel property and let it discharge into a swampy area south of the lake. Because the existing well pump was too small to pump the needed amount of water and the discharge into the swampy area would also need to be pumped, the project was deemed too expensive. The only other alternative was to build a $30,000 filtration plant, which was also too expensive. Remember, this was 1964. The Minnesota Department of Health, in its report, strongly advised St. Louis Park to build a municipal swimming pool rather than spend money on Wolf Lake. For the 1965 season, the beach was never opened, and the site was abandoned. The failure of the Wolf Park swimming beach had 2 positive consequences. First, it provided a net profit of $24,000 from the sale of the sand. This money was designated to be used in the development of the St. Louis Park park system. Secondly, it increased the interest in park development. Plans for parks and recreation in St. Louis Park took on a higher priority, and as a result, a referendum was passed to provide money for parks. In 1972, the new rec center with swimming pool was opened.
Dateline, 1933, St. Louis Park, Minnesota. Kid Can indicted on charges of bootlegging.
Bootleggers flourished during Prohibition, and our local gangster was Isidor Kid Can Blumenfeld. Blumenfeld was born in Romania on September 8, 1900, and came to Minnesota via Canada in 1902. Some say he lived in St. Louis Park. One story mentions a secret escape route out of his house on Cedar Lake Road, which he accessed when the cops came to call, and the kid said, "First, let me get my coat." Robert Whalen says that in the 1950s he lived on Glenhurst. He delivered his newspaper. Mert Dresser has this recollection from the early 1930s. David Doc Blanchard and I had paper routes in the Sunset Gables area near France Avenue. The very best customer on my paper route was Kid Can Blumenfeld. The reason was that Kid Can, in addition to paying for the paper, would give me all the change he had in his pocket. Then at Christmas time, he would give me a roll of bills. There are various explanations about his nickname. The kid claimed his nickname was a boxing title. Another says he was conveniently in the can when his murders were being carried out. And the USA Confidential states because of his many trips to the penitentiary. From 1929 to 1933, Can was involved in bootlegging operations that originated in New Orleans and Canada, supplying the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. He was indicted in New Orleans, but he didn't show up for trial, and the charges were dropped. On August 23, 1933, a federal grand jury in Oklahoma City returned a bill charging conspiracy to kidnap oilman Charles Urschel against George Machine Gun Kelly and others, including none other than Isidor Blumenfeld and his buddy Edward Barney Berman. It was thought that Blumenfeld had been involved in distributing the ransom money, but he was acquitted. He would be indicted several times for bootlegging, but never spent a day in jail. The kid had a knack for being acquitted. Despite at least 3 murders, including the murder of journalist Walter Leggett in 1935, a Mann Act indictment, and a charge of defrauding the Twin City Rapid Transit Company of millions of dollars during the switch from streetcars to buses, witness intimidation, and police payoffs kept him out of jail. By 1942, the FBI identified Kid Can as the overlord of the Minneapolis, Minnesota underworld. In 1961, he was finally convicted of white slavery and bribing a juror and sentenced to 8 years in Leavenworth. He was paroled in 1964 and immediately went to Florida with other mobsters to get rich quick buying real estate in Miami Beach. Ultimate Kid Can historian Paul Maccabee has sifted through thousands of documents and found no evidence that Can ever did live in St. Louis Park. However, two of his brothers definitely did. They say Kid Can retired in St. Louis Park's Jewish community. He died of heart disease on June 21, 1981 at Mount Sinai Hospital and is buried at the Adath Yeshurun Cemetery in Edina.
Can you imagine putting a garbage dump on Excelsior Boulevard and Highway 100 right here in the park? Seem inconceivable? Not on this week's History Minute.
In 1947, a dump was created on Excelsior Boulevard just east of Highway 100. Trash was thrown into a pit that had been created by the Rice Sand and Gravel operation. Almost immediately, complaints about the dump were registered with the village council. Someone from Minneapolis donated a wash tub containing a hand grenade, small bomb, 1,000 rounds of 1918 Army rifle ammunition, 3 machine gun clips, and assorted bullets, all wrapped up in a 1930 Minneapolis Journal newspaper. The St. Louis Park Police donated them right back to Minneapolis for disposal. Eventually, the dump was at capacity. The hill between Byerly's and AAA indicates how high the pile was. AAA headquarters and Park Nicollet were built on the site. In the beginning, the buildings started to sink and elevators started to stink as they filled with methane gas. Both problems were fixed, but such are the hazards of building on mounds of trash. The St. Louis Park Community Band has a long history in the park. In 1891, a band consisting of 10 men, later enlarged to 35, usually played at the State Fair, and the 4th of July celebrations were always a big affair. For several years, the band had no place to meet or practice, and the band of the village went by the wayside. On September 21, 1911, the Journal reported on the Village Harvest Festival and Band Carnival. The celebration brought the entire population of the village to Oddfellow Hall, where the band, bedecked in gay uniforms, played, and the citizens made speeches congratulatory of the achievement of having completed the stringing of electrical lights along the main streets. Another article dated July 13, 1940, tells us that one Clyde Wolford proposed that a St. Louis Park band be formed. In 1941, it is noted that St. Louis Park Municipal Band performed as part of the Miss St. Louis Park contest that year. In 1955, it is noted as well that there was no city band. Many years went by with no band, but a community band movement was spreading throughout the suburbs. Another effort was made, this time by calling people who were identified in old volumes of the Echo-On as having been in high school band. In 2006, the band had over 50 members. Over 1/3 of the members have been with the band for 20 years or more. Concerts are given year-round, and the group has played at Orchestra Hall several times, and they also perform in the holiday concert at the high school each year.
Up next, we'll dangle our toes in the waters of Minnehaha Creek on the History Minute.
The first we know of Minnehaha Creek, or if you prefer, Crick, is in May 1822, when two 17-year-old boys, William J. Snelling, the son of Colonel Snelling, and Joseph Renshaw Brown, a drummer boy from Maryland, followed the creek up to Lake Minnetonka. Snelling couldn't take the mosquitoes and headed back, but Brown and two soldiers from the fort made it all the way, past Indian settlements, up to Gray's Bay and Big Island, where they encountered a Chippewa village. Mills were built on the creek, also called Little Falls Creek, which was much more powerful than it is today. The mill closest to St. Louis Park was Schussler's Mill, built in 1874 and located off Excelsior Boulevard at about Powell Road by the Hopkins border. Also nearby was the Waterville Mill, also known as Edina Mill, and many other names through the years. It was built in 1857 and located at 50th and Browndale in Edina. The mill was known for producing feed, flour, and grain, and was the only mill in the state to produce oatmeal and pearl barley. During the Civil War, Jonathan Grimes would deliver flour to Fort Snelling. His horses knew the way home, and he could sleep in the wagon bed. A note in the 1894 Mail newspaper described the water in Minnehaha Creek as so high that the falls here quite rival that of the Minnehaha. But a dam was built in 1895 at Gray's Bay on Lake Minnetonka, the source of the creek, lowering the water level and dooming all of the creek's mills. There is much more information at the St. Louis Park Historical Society at slphistory.org.
Many thanks to Manny Camelon for the Minnehaha Mills tip. If you've lived in the park since before 1970, you remember well the creosote plant. I do.
Having a creosote plant in our town has been a mixed blessing. Of course, there was the smell. Growing up in the park in the 50s and 60s, I remember well the pungent, rotten egg aroma wafting through our backyard on a warm summer's evening. On the other hand, the plant provided much-needed employment for many people over a period of some 65 years. It's gone now, cleaned up and decontaminated. Republic Creosoting Company, later part of the Riley Tar and Chemical Company, used creosote primarily to preserve wood, usually white pine, for telephone poles, bridge pilings, fence posts, but particularly railroad ties. The refinery was phased out during 1971, and the creosote operation ended in 1972. The plant was demolished shortly after. In 2001, the Louisiana Oak apartment complex was built on the southern section of the property. There are differences of opinion about the dangers of creosote. Some say it's a form of disinfectant. In fact, when Grandma was feeling a little punk, she'd go to the drugstore for a little coal tar, mix it in hot water, and drink it down. Don't try this at home. Coal tar is also a treatment for psoriasis and is the active ingredient in Denerex and T-Gel dandruff shampoos. You can follow up on this and many other interesting stories at the St. Louis Park Historical Society by going to www.slphistory.org.
You've seen one of the park's historic structures along Highway 7, the Nordic Ware Tower, standing 122 feet tall. We'll find out why it's there on this week's History Minute.
Frank Hutchinson Peavey saw the need to find a better way to store grain. He commissioned Minneapolis architect builder contractor Charles F. Hoagland to build the Peavey-Hoagland experimental concrete grain elevator at the intersection of now Highways 100 and 7. It was the first circular grain elevator built of poured concrete in the U.S. and possibly the world. In May 1899, the new elevator was filled, and the next year it was emptied. Skeptics were sure the structure would crack or explode and dubbed it Peavey's Folly. Hundreds of spectators who came to watch the expected explosion were cordoned off to safety in the event the predictions proved true. Jeers turned to cheers when the elevator held, and history was made. The experiment was so remarkable it was reported in the New York Times. However, after the excitement was over, the structure was never again used for grain storage. In about 1969, renovations were made as the structure was in grave danger of toppling over. It was at that time Nordic Ware painted its famous ad on the structure. It was just 50 years ago. As a fifth grader, I sat mesmerized, staring into the black and white television set. The St. Louis Park Orioles, our team, playing for the boys' Minnesota State Championship. I was as excited as if it were Christmas Eve. Could they win? Could they win it all?
Hang on to your hat. Hang on to anything. What a finish to another great tournament. Hill to Ackland, to Fundingsland. He goes in, a layup. Not good. Fight for the ball, goes out of bounds. There comes the end of the game. And that's the end of the game. The final score of the championship game, St. Louis Park 62, South St. Paul 57.
Yes, they did win it all, a half-century ago. Park's 1962 team's starting five consisted of Bruce Ackland, Mark Zanna, Robert Hill, Jerry Orbeck, and Larry Fundingsland. Head coach, Lloyd Holm. Many of the members of that 1962 championship team returned to the park 49 years after that game to be inducted into the St. Louis Park Athletic Hall of Fame in September of 2011.
And now the starting lineup from the 1962 championship basketball team. First up, Mark Zanna, Ph.D. He was a two-year starter. an Oriole tri-captain, a fundamentally sound all-conference guard. Next up is Jerry Orbeck, a strong rebounder and the team's best outside shooter who averaged 9.1 points per game. Another former Park star with a PhD, Robert Hill. He was a 2-year starter and an Oriole tri-captain. He played as a guard forward during his junior year. Coach Lloyd Holm then decided to utilize his 6'3" height at the center position, where he proved to be a very versatile player, averaging 7.6 points per game. We're honored to have Anita Fundingsland here to represent her husband Larry, who sadly passed away in 2005. Larry Fundingsland was the team's best rebounder and most talented frontline player with an array of slick left-handed moves while averaging 11.7 points per game and earning him all-conference honors. Bruce Acklin was a 2-year starter, a tri-captain, and a solid all-around all-conference performer. Today, he'd be considered a scoring point guard. Again, thank you for tonight, and I will say what I learned a long time ago. We're loyal to you, Park High.
The final
Thank
score
you.
of the championship game, St. Louis Park 62, South St. Paul 57.
On December 14, 1948, the New York Giants baseball team announced they were building a $1.5 million stadium on the corner of what was then Wayzata Boulevard and Zarthan Avenue in the park. The stadium would initially be built for the Minneapolis Millers. The Millers team dated back to as early as 1884 and played their games at Nicollet Park until 1955. As the stadium was demolished in 1956, they moved to Met Stadium until the Twins came to town in 1961. Well, the Giants' stadium was never built. There wasn't enough room for parking. The Korean War caused a steel shortage and a moratorium on sports facilities. By the time the war ended, plans for Metropolitan Stadium in Bloomington had already begun. The property was eventually sold in 1974, and today is the site of the Doubletree Hotel, Park Plaza East, Stall Construction, and TGI Fridays. Oh, and the name of the proposed ball field? Candlestick Park. To this day, Candlestick Pond is located at 16th Street and Park Place. The first St. Louis Park Village Hall was in Lincoln School, built at a cost of $8,500 on the corner of West 37th Street and Alabama back in 1890. The school district and the village council split the cost of the building, and the village council held its meetings on the second floor. In 1938, Lincoln School was decommissioned as a school and was sold to the village for $1. Later, an article from 1961 describes the building as a fire hazard that sways in a hard wind, with a floor that ripples like waves on the ocean. The building was built in 2 sections that separated in a big wind. In 1960, the city purchased a 16-acre area at 37th and Highway 100 from Hennepin County, and the planning department proposed it be used for a civic center featuring an open fountain surrounded by public buildings such as the City Hall, a library, municipal auditorium, also a recreation center, police and fire departments. But when Interstate Department Stores of New York offered $440,000 for 10 acres of the property, subsequently constructing Tops Discount City, the city determined that the profit could be used to fund a city hall at another location. In 1961, the City Council chose the Carpenter Park site for its new City Hall. The building cost $170,000 and was completed and occupied by city staff on October 18th of 1963. In 1966, the Lincoln School/Village Hall was sold to Minnesota Rubber and then demolished.
It's not like anything important ever happened here.
Well, that depends as what you define as important. Is your life important to you?
Yeah, so what?
Well, the people who have lived here for the past 125 years and what they did and thought was important to them, too.
Whatever.
I would think that since you're here, the past 125 years would be very important to you.
Who are you and why are you bothering me?
You seem to need to be bothered for your own good.
My own good? What's happening?
We're going on a little trip.
Where are we?
St. Louis Park.
No, really, this looks like a little farming village.
That's because it's 1886.
That's right, we've got to have a good leader. A mayor. Our village needs a mayor. I nominate you, Joseph Hamilton. Me? Sure, you. Nobody better suited. Nobody better. I don't know. Well, we will let the people decide. All for Joseph Hamilton being our first mayor, say aye. Aye. Now, you ladies know that you're not permitted to vote. Boo!